Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Alverson, and with me is Ryder, and we'll be meeting them in person in a little bit. So I wanted to give a little bit of an overview of what this talk is going to be about and how we're going to proceed forward, and then we will go from there. So we're going to start with a brief history of the string quartet. And we're going to talk about why the string quartet as a medium for composers was so intimate for those composers and an expression of some of, in many cases, their most intimate thoughts. And certainly that's the case with Beethoven. We'll then review the brief history of Beethoven's life and his illnesses. And we're going to focus on how those illnesses relate to our current pandemic of COVID-19 and the experiences of not only people who have the disease, but of caretakers in the hospital, frontline providers, but also you. Even if you don't know anyone who has COVID-19 or you don't work in a medical setting, you're probably socially isolated. And a lot of what this will be about is going to be about social isolation and how we can better cope with it as a community. We're going to review in particular a piece by Beethoven, the third movement of his Opus 132 string quartet, which is one of the quartets very late in his life, and why that piece, which is widely regarded as one of the greatest pieces ever written, is so emblematic of the problem we're now facing. And then we're going to listen to a performance of this piece provided to us by this remarkable quartet, Ryder, and we're going to understand it in a much better way once we hear all the way through, because we'll have broken it down. And then at the end, there'll be opportunities for you to ask questions of both me and the quartet. They will be here and listening and actively involved as well. So before I start, I really want to thank Ryder. I've known this quartet and have been a huge fan of this quartet for countless years. I really do believe they're one of the great string quartets in the world right now. I don't know if anybody pays attention to quartet literature. There was this very dynamic, exciting quartet in the late 80s called I forget what they were called, but anyway, the Turtle, whatever, somebody else will remember. But they started off this idea of quartets reaching beyond just the classical quartet literature. And Ryder has taken that to an entirely new level. And I would urge you to listen to some of their repertoire. It's truly astounding, and they're really leaders in the field. And one of the things they've done, which is really exciting, is they just put out this album. It's now available for purchase. It's called Healing Modes. And what is sort of cosmically good about this is I was thinking about this lecture and actually gave it once at Brown long before this came out. But in this album is the very movement that we're going to be speaking about today, because this album is about healing and it's about music. And thank you, Turtle Island String Quartet. Somebody popped that in. I'm slow. But I would really urge everyone to listen to this album. It's exceptional, and buy it to support your artists, because artists are hurting as much as anyone right now. So moving beyond that, I want to talk a little bit today about illness and isolation. And the goal of our talk is to take one of the most isolating and difficult moments of our lives, which is the COVID-19 pandemic, which is not over and is not likely to end soon, and to use Beethoven's life and experiences, and in particular this composition, to explore not only isolation, but also how we can get past isolation together as a community. Before we get to Beethoven, though, we really need to go back so we can understand string quartets in general. And we really need to start with this man. So this is Franz Joseph Haydn. He was one of the innovators of the string quartet. The string quartet is two violins, viola, and cello. And if you would like, you can think of it as a stringed instrument representation of the entire span of the human voice, with two violins being the alto and soprano, the viola being the tenor, and the cello being the bass. It's a spread of voices. And Haydn used this group of instruments to really explore a lot of musical ideas in a way that nobody had ever done before. And this was probably because it was a way of looking at music in its essence, essentially without words, without a libretto. It was a way we could use music to purely appeal to our limbic system, our emotions directly, as opposed to our frontal thought. And he was really intent on creating this wide library of string quartets, which he did. And he was, in fact, a teacher of Beethoven. He was also a teacher of this guy, Mozart, who continued to perfect the medium and write quite a few string quartets. And Mozart really explored the boundaries of what was music at that time, most famously perhaps with his dissonance quartet, which was unique in that it started off very shockingly dissonant for the time. Other examples in the literature, for instance, this man was Ravel, and he only wrote one quartet, but when he wanted to honor his teacher Debussy, who had written a phenomenal quartet, Ravel wrote a quartet to honor his teacher. And you can find throughout the literature of quartets, people writing very sort of personal explorations as composers. But of course, if we have to go to the greatest quartet writer of all, we're going to wind up with Beethoven. His quartets were personal. He wrote 3 groups of quartets. He had some early quartets where he was still very influenced by his teachers, such as Haydn, and was writing in a sort of classical sonata form. Then his middle quartets, where he started really pushing the boundaries, and quite famously, the scherzo of his Opus 59 number 1 quartet is just so off, and you just go, what's going on? It's so different. But they were personal to him. After he wrote his Opus 95 quartet, he said he never wanted it to be performed. Of course, it was and still is to this day one of the audience's favorites. And then his late quartets. And his late quartets really were pushing the boundaries of what people even thought of music. They're an extraordinary volume of work. And in particular, we're going to focus on his Opus 132. But to understand it, we need to understand his life. And so I'll go quickly through his life and talk about the life of Beethoven a little bit. So Beethoven was born in 1770, and he was billed as a child prodigy, much like Mozart was. He was pushed by his father to be a performer in the courts. And in 1792, at the age of 22, he broke out on his own and went to study with Haydn, and he would there play for nobility on the piano. He was a fantastic pianist. It was in 1798 when he started writing his early string quartets, that first volume that is so lovely. And at this time, he already was going deaf. So this idea of him as an old man going deaf isn't totally true. He was 28 when he started going deaf. And the way he tells it is he was perfectly fine. And then in 1798, right about the beginning of his early quartets, he went into a rage, which he tended to do. And right after that, he started having deafness in his ears and this piercing tinnitus, which is that high piercing note that probably some of you can hear right now because it's so common in people. But his got worse and worse and worse throughout his life. So in 1802, he wrote this letter. It's called the Heiligenstadt Testimony. And it's very much a declaration of his inner sadness and an open acknowledgement of his deafness, which he had been trying to hide earlier in his life. And it is essentially a suicide note. And I want to read some sections from it. He said, "Born with a passionate and excitable temperament, keenly susceptible to the pleasures of society, I was yet obliged early in life to isolate myself and to pass my existence in solitude. I was, if at any time resolved to surmount all this, oh, how cruelly was I again repelled by the experience, sadder than ever, of my defective hearing. And yet I found it impossible to say to others, speak louder, shout, for I am deaf." And he's getting at sort of, it was embarrassing as a professional composer to say he was deaf. "No longer can I enjoy recreation in social intercourse, refined conversation, or mutual outpourings of thought. Completely isolated, I only enter society when compelled to do so. I must live like an exile." I hope some of you are thinking about your own experiences right now with COVID-19 and seeing how this parallel seems inherently obvious. Think about this experience he had and how it relates to our own social isolation at this time, and how hard it is for us to stay in our homes only for the last few weeks when he had to live like this forever. So he ends the letter. So be it then. I joyfully hasten to meet death. Farewell. Do not quite forget me, even in death. I deserve this from you because during my life, I so often thought of you and wished to make you happy. Amen. And then he wrote on the outside of the envelope, to be read and fulfilled after my death by my brothers, Carl and Johann. So I think most people recognize and have heard of his struggle with deafness, but what's interesting is in his letters, equally concerning to him, and perhaps less well known, was a lifelong struggle with abdominal pain and diarrhea. Nobody knows what this is. People have hypothesized celiac disease or inflammatory bowel disease. He did, after he's died, have an autopsy where they noted a hepatitis or advanced hepatitis on his liver. However, he was probably heavy on the alcohol, so it could have been that was related to that. But in 1800, he wrote, and this is again in another letter, that malicious demon, however, bad health, has been a stumbling block in my path. My hearing during the last years has become gradually worse. The chief cause of this infirmity proceeds from the state of my digestive organs, which, as you know, were formerly bad enough, but have latterly become much worse, and being constantly afflicted with diarrhea has brought on extreme weakness. Frank, and that's the director of the local general hospital, strove to restore the tone of my digestion by tonics and by my hearing by oil of almonds. But alas, these did me no good whatever. My hearing became worse and my digestion continued in its former plight. This went on until the autumn of last year, when I was often reduced to utter despair. Then some medical asinus recommended me cold baths, but a more judicious doctor, more tepid ones of the Danube, which did wonders for me. My digestion improved, but my hearing remained the same, or in fact got rather worse. A lot of Beethoven's letters are about his illness and his deafness. Interestingly, Beethoven's trust of physicians, and I am one, and I know there are many in the audience, was appropriately skeptical. He said, "Let the rehearsal stand over for the present. I must see my doctor again today, of whose bungling I begin to tire." That was in 1811. In 1816, he wrote, "Notwithstanding all the efforts of my physician, who will not allow me to leave this, the weakness in my chest is no better." He has sort of had a fairly strong distrust of his doctors. So he eventually ended up in his deathbed. And this is actually a drawing of Beethoven in his deathbed. And I think physicians in general, we tend to struggle at really understanding death and the dying experience. And perhaps that's, as physicians and nurses and frontline providers, through an effort to compartmentalize. I see the people right now in New York on the front lines and how they have to go home and somehow muster the strength to be there the next day. A good friend of mine who's a nurse right now texted me today saying she just had a horrible day and didn't know if she could make this talk. Certainly, Beethoven's physicians didn't help him very much, partially through dispassion, but I think mostly through just not understanding his illness. And I feel like we've come a long way from those days. But regarding understanding of death and dying, we continue to work and continue to improve. All patients with severe illness, or in many of them, contemplating of death and even suicide at such a time is common. There was a remarkable medical anthropologist, his name is Arthur Kleinman, and he'd written extensively about interviewing people who were ill or had chronic illness or were going to die. And he assimilated many illustrative quotes of this experience. And this is hard to talk about, but I think it's important because I think we have to understand how much isolation is a part of that. And so I'm going to quote one person from his book. Her name is Alice. I don't know if that's her real name. She said, "Time is running out for me, doctor. For others, there is hope of cure, but for me, this disease can never go away. The complications get more severe. I will try to get on top of this thing, yet in the long run, I will go down that road myself." And again, we're getting at the isolation of this experience. There are several themes that come to the fore in Kleiman's work, and I think they're important, and loneliness is certainly one of them. He spends a lot of time talking about the inner world of the patient, and we're going to look a little bit at the inner world of Beethoven too in his music. There's another one which comes up frequently, which is waves of awareness. And this is an illustrative quote that I'll get to by a guy named Gordon. All that nonsense that written about stages of dying, as if there were complete transitions, rooms that you enter, walk through, then leave behind for good. What rot! The anger, the shock, the unbelievableness, the grief, they're part of each day. Who says you work your way eventually to acceptance? I don't accept it. Today, I can't accept it. Yesterday, I did partly. Saturday, I was there, kind of in a trance, waiting, ready to die, but not now. Today, it's the fear all over again. So to put it together, isolation, fear, and waves of awareness and moments when it goes away. And you think about, when you've had some tragic experience in your life, thinking back to, your child walks in the room and does something funny, and it's this brief escape, and then it comes crashing down upon you again. So the goal of this talk, and now I get to it, is to use Beethoven's String Quartet, this movement, which was written for exactly this purpose, I believe, to understand serious illness, death, and dying, and experience it as a community. My goal is to destroy the isolation of COVID-19 through our ability to interconnect through digital media, but also even from 6 feet away. Be able to talk about these things, be able to reach out to each other in times of stress and when we need love the most. So in 1821, Beethoven's failing health got way worse. He decreased his usual productivity. He composed between 21 and 1823, mostly solo piano work, but he did write one piece, and I want to get to it, which is the Missa Solemnis, which is this remarkable choral mass. He was he was very religious, but he didn't necessarily believe that the church had it right towards the end of his life. He didn't go to church very often. But he spent a lot of this time in his life researching church choral music. And then, of course, in 1824, wrote his remarkably famous choral symphony, the Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And it was the next year in 1825 when he became profoundly ill. And he wrote this letter to his doctor. Still in a bad way, feeling weak and irritable, and I think at last we must have recourse to stronger medicines, and yet not too violent. Surely I might now drink white wine with water, for that deleterious beer is quite detestable. My catarrhal condition is indicated by the following symptoms. I spit a good deal of blood, though probably only from the windpipe. I have constant bleeding from the nose, which has been often the case this winter. There can be no doubt that my digestion is terribly weakened, and in fact, my whole system, and as far as I know my own constitution, my strength will never be recruited by its natural powers. So he was convinced he was weak. And he lay on his deathbed for about a month. He had help, but he was mostly alone. And as he lay there contemplating his own mortality, one miraculous day, he got better. And it was in fact still 2 years before he would eventually die. But this miraculous improvement from the depths of illness and isolation caused him to do this one thing. He got up from his bed, he went to his music writing desk, and he wrote this movement. There was no quartet at that time to put it into. He did that later. He wrote this movement. And this is one of the very few pieces where he wrote instructions or indications of what it was about. He didn't do that typically, but he did in this movement. And so we're going to go through this movement together. So with the help of Brooklyn Ryder. So what this movement is titled, you can see it on your screen, I hope, is Heilige Dankgesang eines Genesenen an die Gottheit in der lyrischen Tonart. Forgive my bad German accent, which means holy song of thanks from a convalescent to God in the Lydian mode. So before I get into the piece, this is sort of dorky, but I think it's interesting. Bear with me. Is the Lydian Mode part. So I'm going to play, and hopefully I won't embarrass myself here. But this is an F major scale. That's an F major scale. Now the Lydian mode, you bump up the fourth note, which is a B flat, to a B natural. So it's stretched up, it's augmented up a half step. So it's, and what that does is it brings up the whole thing. It's like there's two leading tones instead of one in the scale. And the reality is you probably don't recall a piece you've ever heard that's played like this. There's one famous piece and it's this one. So it's the Simpsons theme song, has a B natural. But other than that, really no pieces are played in the Lydian mode. And that was true at Beethoven's time too. So this was very unusual. But I think it's sort of interesting because of this building, which is the St. Magnus Cathedral in the Orkney Islands. Bear with me. So at the time Beethoven was writing this piece in the Lydian mode, there was very little written in the Lydian mode, but there was one super famous piece, which was called the Hymn to St. Magnus, which was from the 12th century, and it was in the Lydian mode. And what's interesting is the Orkneyinga saga recalls in great detail how people come and go to St. Magnus's resting place here and are miraculously healed. So there was an association between the Lydian mode and being healed. And it's my best guess that's why, though nobody really knows why this piece was in the Lydian mode, but that might have been it because he was studying choral music. That aside, the piece itself is broken down into 5 parts. And to make it super simple, it's slow, fast, slow, fast, slow. The slow parts are all similar, and they progress in complexity, much like his 3 periods of quartets. You might think of the first one similar to his first quartets. It's fairly structurally sound. The second one starting to mix it up. And the last section really starts getting interesting. And then the fast sections are these outbursts of happiness. That's when the kid comes into the room and lifts your spirits briefly. So we're going to go through these a little bit one at a time with the help of Brooklyn Ryder, and you'll see what we're going to do. So I want to look at the first slow section first. So remember, it's slow, fast, slow, fast, slow. We're going to just look at the first slow section as an example. And this slow section is broken down into further pieces. We'll think of it as hymn, prelude, hymn, prelude, hymn, prelude, hymn. Okay, here's what I mean. For those of you who can read music, you don't have to. You can see on my screen that there are these quarter notes here, that's the prelude, and then these half notes here, that's the hymn, and it goes quarter notes, half notes, quarter notes, half notes, quarter notes, half notes. And the prelude is really waves, getting back to what Gordon, the patient, said, these sort of waves of sadness, and it's an isolating experience. The hymn is very much a church theme, so we're going to go through these one at a time. Let's look at just these 8 notes of the prelude. And what I want you to listen for is sort of these waves that are coming as one player takes this 2-note motif over and over and over again. So Brooklyn Ryder is going to play from home on this one and play us just these first 8 notes. So that's the prelude. And when you hear that, I want you to be hearing those, you're going to hear that throughout this piece, and they're going to play this, the whole thing at the end. And I want you to listen for that and think about that maybe as an internal sort of quiet, introspective feeling. The hymn is maybe something different, and perhaps early in your life, your first experience with death was in a church where people were talking about it, and it was like societally driven, and it's really the formal recognition of God. And it is a hymn. When they play the piece, it's impossibly slow, so you can't really hear it. So what I've asked the Brooklyn Ryder to do, and they kindly agreed, is they sped up the tempo really, really fast for just this one section, because I want you to hear it so you can hear it really is a hymn. Listen to it once, sped up really fast. And if you can forgive me, it's like da 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 da. It's almost like, yeah, I sing that in church. Okay. So we'll hear now a combination of these two, a prelude and a hymn. I would like to move ahead, not for the first prelude and hymn, but we'll start with the second. For two reasons. One is I want you to hear how he's changing the loneliness part. Now instead of da da, he's going ba ba. He's changing the way it's played, exploring other facets of this. And then the hymn changes a little bit as well. But this time I'm not going to speed up the hymn, or they aren't. It's going to be regular tempo. So you'll sort of see how incredibly slow this hymn is and how that leads to this certain remarkable peacefulness, perhaps brought on by Beethoven's relationship with God. Thank you, guys. So let's skip ahead. I would like to skip all the way ahead to the third slow section. The middle one is sort of like the in-between, if you will. And we're going to focus a little bit on the third slow section because I want you to see how things changed in Beethoven's life now. This is now the end of his life. His inner contemplation, his loneliness, is very mixed in with his appreciativeness of God. They overlap. The complexity is so much more because his understanding of life is so much more. And so just from the very beginning of this slow section, you can really start to see how he's really taking this motif, but stretching it, pushing it, and overlapping it with him so they're both at the same time. And here's the music, and you can see, for those of you who do read music, the increased complexity of the noting. And they're going to play it for us right now. There, you can see Colin is on the right, he's playing the hymn, and Johnny on the left, he's got the melody. And Nick's gonna take it. He's got the hymn, Colin's playing the melody. Hopefully you start to get the sense of how those things are mixed in together. Now, Beethoven did have moments of joy, as do we all. And perhaps one of the most miraculous moments of joy is when you hit the fast section of this piece. And I want to share that with you. I want to share with you the notation, which you can see on your screen. He wrote Neue Kraft fühlend, which means feeling new strength. This is him getting up out of the bed. This is his recovery. And so we're going to start a few measures before the recovery during a hymn section. This is the first fast section. It's at the very end of the first slow section. And I want you to listen to the progression of that hymn, and then how it suddenly, this moment of sort of discovery that you're improving, and then this bursting of joy. It's one of the great moments in all of music. Johnny, I could listen to you play that all day. Okay, so what we're going to do now, I'm going to broadcast a complete performance of this piece right here onto the internet now through my thing. If you are not seeing what I'm broadcasting, or it's shaky or the sound isn't so good, you can also go to YouTube. This is the same performance, and enter WGBH Brooklyn Ryder, or that YouTube address if you want to write it in. The key is you have to go ahead to video to 2115 because it's an entire concert. That's where this movement starts. You can listen there in a separate window and come back at the end. After this performance, the Brooklyn Riders here, they're going to answer questions, and I'm going to be keep track of them. You can go to the Padlet website that we showed you earlier, and I'll show you the link again in a second. But for now, I'd just like everyone to take a moment, take a breather, and I'm going to stop sharing that, and I'm going to start sharing the video itself. And we're going to just listen to this performance together. When you're listening, I want you to hear the slow section, that deep inner silence, and the fast sections, the utter joy. But where I'd like you to think about is at the very end of that last slow section. And I'd like you to think about Gordon and his relationship with his illness, and whether Beethoven is going through stages or whether his grief continues to recur to him. And mostly I'd like you to think about something that's been bothering me a lot by this epidemic, and I don't know how you all are experiencing, but it's isolationism. And the great travesty, I think, is right now in my hospital and in hospitals around the country, because of a need to control this virus and a need to protect hospital workers from dying from it themselves. Hospitals aren't allowing people to have visitors as they die of COVID-19. And I think about the extraordinary isolationism that's being inflicted upon these people, and Beethoven's experience of it, and how his music may help us to understand what our loved ones are going through, and help us to inspire ourselves to find ways to reach out to them while they are sick in the hospital, and also find out ways to reach out to each other during this time of this horrible social isolation. So thinking all of those things, thinking about Beethoven as he lay in his bed, I'm now going to play Brooklyn Ryder's completely remarkable performance of the Heiligenstadt movement of his Opus 132 string quartet. So that was awesome. Thank you, guys. So if anybody has any questions, I think we can throw open the mics, Kyle, for the quartet. And you guys can feel free to jump in. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions and we'll start off there. And maybe we can get somebody from the quartet's thoughts on this. One question, actually, first I'll answer a quick question. Somebody said, can you tell us the full name of the medical anthropologist you referred to? His patient was Gordon. His name is Arthur Kleinman. And I was pulling that from the book, The Illness Narratives. It's a phenomenal book if anybody wants to read it. Second question, maybe somebody from the quartet can answer this. I have no idea what he would have said. What do you think Beethoven would have to say to us now about having to grasp living in a world with COVID?
Well, first, maybe I'll jump in and then pass it off to the guys. I mean, after that piece, it's always hard to speak. So, but and I think there is an element of Beethoven that I learned this story from Nick. Actually, I don't know where you read it, but apparently, when Beethoven had a student once who passed away, and then the mother or father, correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, was grieving, but it was like, why didn't Beethoven come and visit us? Why didn't he write or say anything about this? And I guess he hadn't for several days or a week, whatever it was. And then he showed up and said, we will not talk right now. We will not talk about this matter. I will speak in tones. And I think, here we are, and there are no words, I imagine. I mean, I'm not a doctor. I'm here in my house with my family. That's great. I experience, what everyone else is experiencing in that situation. We're relatively lucky with a roof over our head and food here and all that. But music can, be a part of healing. It can be addressing illnesses. It can be talking to the illness that we all will have in our hearts that we're going to have to get over at some point from all of this. And maybe music can be part of that process.
If I could even say, I agree with everything Colin is saying, but I would also maybe even other than the word can, would be need to, like music needs to address this. I think Beethoven himself, in stories like that, and others, that we heard from Beethoven's contemporaries, Beethoven felt a need for music to address the soul and healing. That was a deep, belief of his. And I think that comes from centuries of tradition. You mentioned the church, Brian, in the lecture. It's also like the 16th century Italian theorist, Zarlino, said that the Lydian Mode was a remedy for the fatigue of the soul, and also similar for that of the body. And so this is part of a long tradition ever since music, the music that we know, going back to the Greeks, of music filling in this need. Maybe it's somewhere between the everyday human experience and then what medicine provides. Anyway, but music does fill that gap somehow. And I think Beethoven felt a sort of overwhelming need to fill that in his own life with his music.
Another question came up, and it's what is Brooklyn Ryder's message to us viewers in New York on how to cope with and recover from the losses due to COVID and managing our changed world? Do you guys have any messages for your fellow New Yorkers?
That's a hard one. I mean, I think it's
maybe that performance was the message.
I mean, it's the best we can do as musicians. That's a tough one. I mean, we're a string quartet. We can't even be in the same room at this moment. And I think we've always treated that idea. I think you can only get so close to another human being. One of the ways to get closest to them is through playing in a string quartet. And in the moment of playing a movement like that, you literally are you may feel like you're not touching your own strings anymore, you're touching someone else's. And then that resonance hopefully transfers to someone else. But I mean, I have my own strategies for coping at this moment, and it's relying on family a lot and schedule and mundane things, actually. And somewhere between a movement like that of Beethoven and just the daily doing the tasks of life, everyone finds their own way, I guess.
I guess, also Beethoven, like, Brian, you like 1825 is when this was all going down, and this piece was written, and Beethoven was kind of at the height of this bowel infection, and it was just looking at certain death. And, somehow in the midst of this, and in his own feeling of new strength there, like, he found the place and the space to feel gratitude, for his own gifts, and what he could share with the world. So like in the middle of all this pain, like here he is sharing this message of gratitude in a way, and like sharing that openly, not only for his time, but also like all time to come, and there's just, to me, like, that's a power in that message, looking into Beethoven in this time, of like, what do we have, even in the midst of a lot of darkness and uncertainty, what do we individually have to give thanks for? I think Beethoven's example of that is so powerful.
A couple of questions have come up about the style of your playing, and while this is mostly about Beethoven, I think you guys do such a beautiful job. There were two questions that are somewhat related. One is, are the glissandos written, or are they part of your interpretation? And the second was, can you share your thoughts on the use of vibrato during your performance? How were those decisions made?
Johnny, Michael?
I mean, just for my own musical philosophy, we're very used to growing up hearing like a vibrato on every note and a very heightened sense of expression, and that gives musical meaning. But I had a teacher of the Guarneri Quartet, David Sawyer, who used to say vibrato on every note is like just a layer of icing everywhere. And he really challenged me to start thinking about thinking of each note by itself and finding its own resonance. And then if you want to add some vibrato to it, that to heighten some sort of phrase or expression, it's something added rather than something you take away. So when you ask a question that's sort of like, why do you play with no vibrato or something like that, that to me sounds like it's kind of like backwards. It's like, the question we had to actually ask is, why do you play with vibrato? Because, that's the added thing. But I don't know, someone else can add to that. But
well, Brian, we're just talking about, the choral aspect of this movement, but also the way that a string quartet represents the human voice. And I think like early in Brooklyn Ryder, when we first got together, I think we shared this idea that the quartet does represent the human voice, and so in its purest form. And so we do, I guess, start closer from these pure voices and finding the blend of the voices, and then finding ways to color whatever we're doing with vibrato or without, and with all sorts of other things that we do. And glissando or portamenti, which is when you connect, from one note to the next, and you hear that connection audibly. That's also part of the human voice, and something that was very much part of the tradition. Part of the performing tradition of the string instruments prior to, say, World War II. We've gone away from that, but something that we love, and we share a love of historical recordings, and I don't know, it's just another thing. that brings us together.
Mhm. Yeah. You know, this.
Oh, my screen is frozen a little bit. Okay, there we go. Go ahead.
Oh, sure. I was, I was just gonna say, it's also like, as we were talking about before too, this is music that references like um, late Beethoven, right? Because this is music that is referencing a past. Like here's Beethoven looking way back into the church tradition, of like European like church modes, so in that point in his life, he's taking this really retrospective. You talked about his research into church music, Brian, but also the late quartets. I think famously Beethoven's also like looking to the future, like in this like crazy way that nobody has ever really been able to, be so visionary in a way. And so that's this crazy reach that he's doing. And so the music has to feel out of its time as it was, written. So how do you do that? And how do you suspend that? And I don't know. I think that all then comes down to like the individual decisions about sound and sound world and what one goes for. And I think what we try to do is just try to get outside of ourselves and outside of the, like, I play the viola, Johnny plays the violin, Colin plays the violin, Michael plays the cello. And this is, it's actually what actually helps with the quartet and this incredible piece that Beethoven has written. But what helps us transcend the string quartet as a form, and I think what Johnny is saying about thinking about voices, thinking about traditions, like that's all our kind of response to that. And that would look totally different for another quartet.
Yeah,
as it should.
I'll just speak on behalf of the Brooklyn Ryder. They all of them have played really fascinating different music from different parts of the world. They've been involved in the Knights and in Yo-Yo Ma's project, the Silk Road project. And obviously they have a lot of experience with really stretching the boundaries of music. And this relates to another question from, I'm pleased to say we're joined by Monica Felkel, who's sort of an important person in the music scene in New York. She asks, essentially, she's curious about what sort of program you would create alongside the Opus 132 in the post-pandemic world, and maybe that relates to your quartet, and you could speak to some of the other music you've played.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to just kind of kick that off. I mean, you mentioned that album in the beginning, and this, of course, is one way to program with this Opus 132 string quartet. But we decided that this is such a powerful theme, and we were saying before how this has been a theme in a way of music for a very long time. I mean, Beethoven didn't invent the idea of healing and music coming together. It goes way back before Beethoven. But what would it be like if we had composers of our time actually reflecting on this, and sort of imagining not only like what are the elements of healing in the world now, but actually even more poignantly, like what is in need of healing in the world. And, of course, we're a quartet too that has done a lot of new music. So we have really got one foot in the tradition and we've got one foot in like today very much. And I think in all of our programs. And so we commissioned 5 composers to write pieces on this theme, and they came back with incredible ideas about that, people who shared ideas of very personal illness, and also like societal and political ills, like one piece is about the US-Mexico border crisis. Another piece is about the Syrian refugee crisis in the Mediterranean. Another is about mental health and the great taboo that this represents in the composer's native country of China, for instance. And so we have this really incredible assembly of compositional voices, like contributing incredibly deep material in this. And we've blended that with the Beethoven. In our recording, actually, these pieces happen in between the movements of Beethoven, which is a slightly unorthodox way to program it, but it really does kind of magically work, in a way, because then it becomes a dialogue, about healing over time and the perennial need for healing And in any time that we live in, this is an always kind of topic.
Cool, thank you. So another question came up, which is just, I guess, business. Yes, this is going to be recorded and should be available in a few days after we're finished with it at YouTube. Another question, it was for me, which was, as a physician, how do I process the death of a patient, both in the short term, but also the deaths I've witnessed over the years? I don't want to speak for all the other remarkable care providers who are out there, and many of them have had far more profound experiences than I have. I'm in the fortunate and also unfortunate role of being a pediatric hospitalist, so I could take care of hospitalized children. And I have had several deaths in my career which affect me profoundly. And it is, in fact, music like this that helps me get through these things. Maybe Beethoven is reaching out and helping me as well. One of my patients was a girl with cancer in my early training, and she gave me a little star ornament that she made with an arts and crafts person in the hospital, and it's still on my tree every year, and every year I think about that. I had a baby who died in my hands, and after trying for hours to save the baby, and you don't really, time helps, but I would say that in the immediate aftermath, it is awful. And you just have to get one foot in front of the other. And over time, I have found that love and connection with other people have been how I personally healed, and finding new avenues to happiness. And for me, a big part of it's music. I'm a terrible musician compared to these geniuses in front of you, but I play a ton. And I've had the fortune of playing quartets with Colin in the past, which was one of the great moments, and awfully the Shostakovich octet, and that's a story we won't tell. But basically, it's through music and my connections with my friends and my loved ones, I think, that we all managed to get going again, because there's so much to life that is Neue Kraft. There's so much to life that is the joy that I get to bring to my patients when they get better, and I bring to my friends to support each other. I guess with that, maybe we'll close, but I would like to end actually with thoughts from the quartet, specifically about this piece and how it's affected you, and if you have any further closing thoughts before we end.
It occurred to me just what you were talking about there, Nick, about Beethoven looking way into the past, while in terms of the musical materials, and yet also casting his gaze so far into the future. And I was thinking about, this is, T.S. Eliot was very, very inspired by this Beethoven quartet. He wrote apparently that he hoped to get something of that into verse before he died. And his poem, Four Quartets, is modeled off after the form of Opus 132, 5 sections. And he has the title Four Quartets in there. It's all, and for those of you who know that poem, it's completely a meditation on time. And he's always talking about time future and time past, but all is always now. And I guess the thing I love about music is that you do at once get to step outside of time and be completely present. And usually that happens with other human beings in a room with you. So like watching this video that we just did it literally was like stepping into another universe where people could be together and hear clapping at the end of a movement was very strange, but I know we'll get back to that point. I don't know when, but we are definitely looking forward to that, and looking forward to playing this piece a whole bunch more and other pieces in our life, and to do so with always renewed commitment and knowing that it could be the last one, and maybe that's, and kind of anything one says is cliched. That's why we play music, but it is to play every every concert as if it's your last one, because it might be, and you come into this world alone and you go out alone, even if people are with you. So I don't know what to say, but I'm very grateful to have this conversation, Brian, and for you to reach out to us. And I will just share that the place I met Brian was a music camp called Greenwood, a place where the love of people and music took root in me just about as much as anywhere. And in fact, the summer that I played a quartet with Brian was when I had a loss in my family of my mom. And Brian was very much there for me. And it was music and people who got me through that time. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Colin. And thank you, Brooklyn Ryder. You guys are amazing and do wonderful work. And I'm so grateful for this album. And thanks to everyone out there for listening. And I hope this was educational and can serve as some source of support during this COVID-19 outbreak. You've got the love of your friends and family around you. All right. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, Brian.